Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Insight with Political Tours and Beyond the Headlines. Alexander Lukashenko is in a fix. Booed by his own workers, forced to deploy police around his presidential palace, he now looks more worried than he's ever done in 26 years as president. The Kremlin too is nervous about a possible revolution in Belarus. Vladimir Putin has offered to send in extra police, and at the same time in Russia, President Putin's key opponent, Alexei Navalny, is poisoned and now lies in a coma in a Berlin hospital. What's going on, and is it all in some way connected? Today we have Igor Kuley, a Belarusian journalist, expelled by Belarus during similar protests some time back and now working in Warsaw. Hello, Igor.
Hello.
Thanks for having with us today. We'll get to your story in a second, why you're in Warsaw and not in Minsk. And then we also have Leonid Ragozin, political tours expert, who's in Riga, Latvia. I think there's a sort of commonality there, both with you being out of your sort of home nations, Leonid.
Yeah, that's correct. Good afternoon to everyone in Europe. Good evening to people in Australia, and good morning to Americans.
Excellent, great. Well, there's a lot to get through. Firstly, I think it's really important to understand how different Belarus is from any of its neighbors, including Russia. And Igor, I'd like to start with you straight away and tell us a bit about your own story first, before we actually come on to the protests and what's been happening there recently. So Igor, can you just tell me a bit about your background? What happened to you? Why are you in Warsaw, not Minsk?
First of all, I started studying here in Poland in 2002, but in 2006, my stepfather ran for election in Belarus. He was the main rival of Alexander Lukashenko from opposition. And that was the only example in Belarusian modern history that Belarusian opposition united from Communist Party to right nationalist parties. They united together and they elected one person, my stepfather, Alexander Milinkevich. And of course, because of the cheatings on these elections and the system Alexander Lukashenko made 16 years before, it's almost impossible to win the elections against Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus. So there were protests like they are now in Belarus in 2006, and thousands of people were on the streets. And on the second day of the protest, that we called it tent city was founded on the central square of Minsk, and we stayed there for 4 nights or 5 nights. It was during the night, it was like several hundred people stayed only, but in the evening or during the day it was more people, because they come and spend time talking to each other. It was peaceful protest, very similar to that in Ukraine, what was in 2004. And after 5 days of protesting on this main square, the government, maybe Alexander Lukashenko, decided that they need to stop this because it was a bad image, and more and more people were coming.
So the police were sent in and you were detained along with hundreds of others?
Yes, and finally at night we were detained and put to prison. It was 1,000 people were detained and 700 went to prison in 2006, and I was among them. And after I was released in half a month in prison, I had few calls from Belarusian police, but I'm not sure that that were guys from police. I think that it was someone from KGB, and they invited me to come to a police station to talk. And we know it was in past that people who go there, they usually never get out of these police stations. They start because they invite you as a witness of something that we just want to talk with you, but later they change your status from witness to people who they accuse of doing something, and then they could take you to prison for a
Yeah.
few years.
Effectively, you were forced out. And I know that there were charges brought against you with a possible 5.5-year prison sentence attached to it. And that really made your life very difficult. I'm just going to cut the story slightly short.
Yeah,
and that
sure.
meant you couldn't be back in Belarus for some time until there were talks with the EU. But my overall point is that Lukashenko has been doing this for a very long time, rigging elections, clamping down on protests, and he's been quite successful at it.
Yeah, sure. He started in 1996. He was only 2 years in charge when he. I don't know how to say. It's like a military coup in Belarus happened because there was a protest in parliament. There were a nationalistic party in Belarus in parliament at that time, and they protested against the new introduction to our constitution. And he used force and police to beat these people. I mean, he used force inside of parliament, and this parliamentarians, these senators were thrown out of the building of the parliament at the time.
Igor, I'm just going to bring in Leonid because Leonid has covered Belarus for some time, and I'm very interested in a moment to get the Russian perspective as well. But before we come to that, Leonid, Belarus is completely different, isn't it? I mean, it's really like an authoritarian Soviet-style state. There's nothing else really like it in Europe, is there?
It is different. It is not radically different from, say, Russia and Ukraine, but it is quite peculiar, and it was more different, say, 5 or 7 years ago, when it did feel like they used to call it, I think, in the Lonely Planet Guide, socialism with cappuccino. So there remnants of the Soviet times were much more visible there than in Russia or Ukraine. And also, again, if you think in terms of the restaurant scene or cafe scene, it was quite underdeveloped compared to Moscow, Kiev back in the time. That changed in the last 5 years or so, as sort of more and more businesses were appearing, and the economy was modernizing. After many years of stagnation under Lukashenko, there were visible changes with the economy. Okay. And
just before you get into that a bit more, I just want to have a few reminders of the Soviet-style economy that was there. So, I mean, Igor, you've got collective farms, you've got 5-year plans, and this seems incredible.
Yeah, and still 75% of heavy industry belongs to state. I mean, the Belarusian state owns half of Belarusian economy. I think it's the biggest number among European countries, because that was the main idea of Alexander Lukashenko and what he promised to Belarusian people in 1994. I will not sell these big plants and you will still have these jobs. We will never do the mistake they did in Russia, he always repeated, that they sell everything to oligarchs. We will never do this. And he kept his promise. I mean, we still have this.
Yeah. But at the same time, it felt that probably 5 years ago or so, the government has realized that the social model is not competitive compared to neighbors. So changes were underway. And so there is this fledgling IT sector that emerged in Belarus, which is playing now a role in the current events. On the anti-Lukashenko side, not on the pro. So it is a change in society, and I guess there is a similarity with Russia in the sense that it is Lukashenko's stability as much as Putin's stability in Russia that brought about a new mood in society. The society in Belarus has evolved quite a bit from the time when they quite willingly elected Lukashenko in democratic election. And that was a reaction to the turmoil of the early 1990s. They elected him, they supported the return of the Soviet-style flag and coat of arms to the country. Yet, the same people, or maybe not the same people, but same people and their children and their grandchildren 26 years later, they were fed up with Lukashenko, and they started quite unexpectedly to everyone, to most experts in the region, and I guess to themselves as well.
Okay,
They started
I think this is
protesting
really
against
interesting,
Lukashenko.
Leonid, because I think what you're both talking about is a sort of a kind of social contract. So, you know, it surprises us in the West that we think of authoritarian leaders, even including North Korea, have no legitimacy with the people. But I think you know, what you see is that these sort of dictatorships or authoritarian regimes need to have some form of legitimacy. And I think what both of you are saying is that this model that Lukashenko had worked for some time, but seemed increasingly anachronistic, out of pace with its neighbors, and that was beginning to break down. So Igor, what has been happening then in the last few months? Why has this been brought to a head, Igor?
I don't think that we need to start a few months, just few months ago. We need to start earlier, like 3 years ago. In 2017, Lukashenko made his first big mistake, or for the first time he break this social contract so hardly, because he introduced the parasite decree, so-called parasite decree. Unemployed people should pay for state $200 per year just because they have no job.
I mean, this is a revenue-making idea, and I think was the idea to get money back from remittances, or what was the? I mean, basically, the state's trying to get more money.
Because in Belarus we have this free health care system, we have free education system. So that was the idea. If you do not contribute to Belarusian budget, you are not employed, you do not work and pay taxes. Somehow you get money because you live, you buy food. So you need to pay to Belarusian budget this one fee per year. That law was aimed to people who work abroad. For example, for Belarusian, 500,000 of Belarusians working in Russia, or a few 100,000 people working in the European Union. So they need to bring money in country and pay to state. That was the idea, but that was a mistake as well, because a lot of people were living inside of Belarus and were very angry because they expected that the state would help them with finding job and with some support, maybe financial support before they find a job, and instead they get this law that they need to pay for state. Yeah. That was the first.
A lot of increased anger building up with the regime, and then more recently with COVID as well. I get the sense that in terms of the reporting what was going on within the country, people weren't just seeing the truth, Igor.
Yes, COVID was the second big mistake, because the countries around Belarus, all countries, introduced this epidemic. How to say it exactly properly? Quarantine. And Belarus did not. We were the only country that keep on working. People, the students went to universities and schools were open. Everything was open. And at the same time, Belarusian propaganda, I call it propaganda because all televisions, all TV stations inside Belarus belong to state. So propaganda said that everything is okay inside the country. We have only 100 people died of COVID-19, and we have only 500 people per day that get ill. And at the same time, they said, but in Poland, it's very bad situation. In the United States, hundreds of thousands of people died. So people have this dissonance. They cannot believe that we are some exceptional country that have other illness or, you know.
And then the election takes place in this context, and it's rigged again, but this time people are not ready to accept it. And I think we've seen, you know, a lot of that. I think most people have been aware of that media coverage. So Leonid, do you get the sense, or both of you, do you get the sense that this is different this time around? I mean, Lukashenko really does seem scared. This is a regime in trouble, Leonid.
Yes, I think it is. There are many different indications of this. One indication is that the protest is nationwide. Because usually, and if you take Russia, for example, the protest would be confined to the capital and its middle class. Now the protest is extremely wide. It's happening in all the regional centers. It's happening in small towns, even in villages. Secondly, it spans social classes. Workers at those major sort of socialist styled industrial facilities, big machinery plants, they are a major part of the protests. Like for example, there is a day of strike announced today, and people were urged to come to the gates of various plants in Minsk and elsewhere around the country. So that's very much part of the protest. And one of the workers, who I believe is now detained, he became one of the major protest leaders. And also there are indications from polling stations where some of the sort of brave members of the commissions, they were releasing the real results of the election. And at this polling stations, it was pretty clear that Lukashenko was losing to the opposition rival. So we can, with a great deal of confidence, say that this time around, Lukashenko is probably not the legitimate president. And in the very least, a recount or re-election should take place in order to actually learn about the will of the people in Belarus.
And when you've got that sense of consensus, when you've got the sense everyone understands that the regime is both brittle and illegitimate, it's going to be very difficult for him to maintain the illusion that he can remain in power.
Sorry, can I just say one thing? It is very important to understand that Lukashenko still has a support base. And this support base is not insignificant. It exists. And he's now he's trying to polarize societies. He's trying to rally his supporters. And he's trying to sort of create a kind of cold civil war situation, or a real civil war situation. That's what Lukashenko and what his Russian backers are intent on.
I just want to make, yes.
Whilst we're just doing that, I would just want to get people to start putting their questions in the Q&A box below. So if you can just start writing your questions, and we'll take that. Igor will come to you in just a second. And Isabel, could you bring up the cartoon that we have ready as well, which I want Leonid to talk about. But Igor, go ahead while Isabel's bringing up that cartoon. Igor.
Yeah, I just want to say that it's also very important to understand that Belarus has no independent sociology. I mean, we don't have any independent institutions that can run polls in our country. There are only 8 companies that are allowed to make polls on political issues in Belarus, and all of them are dependent from Alexander Lukashenko, from some state institutes. So the only leak that happened in the last 5 or 7 years was the leak in March 2020. The National Academy of Science leaked a small part of poll that Lukashenko has only 24% of support in Minsk, in the capital, where 1/5 of Belarusian population lives. So we can imagine that Lukashenko has maybe 25 to 30% around the country. So it's very small number. I think that it's the smallest number during all his history he is in power.
I just want to reiterate that, Igor, you've been able to go back and forth and report in Belarus freely since 2014, but you haven't been able to go during the quarantine period, because if you did, you'd go into quarantine, I think, in Poland. Is that right?
Yeah, sure. In Poland, I need to stay 14 days then. So the last time I was in March in Belarus.
Right. Okay, great. Leonid, tell us a bit about this cartoon. We're going to now expand the conversation and talk really about how this impacts the region. The Kremlin is obviously very worried about the situation. We'll come on to that in a second, and we'll come on to Alexei Navalny. But also this presents an opportunity, and that's what this cartoon is about.
Sure. So you probably recognize this short man on top of the cliff, and he is clutching a paper which says in Russian, a treaty on integration. And that pertains to the fact that officially there is a state formation which is called the Union State of Russia and Belarus. It was created back in the late 1990s by President Yeltsin, and it was very much Lukashenko's initiative at the time. For Yeltsin, it was more of a concession to the revanchists, to the Communist Party. But Lukashenko was the champion of integration between Russia and Belarus back in the 90s. And at the time, there were rumors, and a lot of analytics was written by the fact that Lukashenko might have been interested in becoming the head of this union state when Yeltsin would have eventually departed. His dreams of being this, ruler of united Russia and Belarus and probably Ukraine as well, were ruined by the coming of this little man on the top of the cliff. And now it is Putin's turn to offer to Lukashenko as a kind of as a rescue this new treaty or more or additions to the treaty on integration, which would really firmly integrate Belarus into Russian economy. So as an example, they were talking about common currency, like either Russian ruble becoming a currency in Belarus or a new currency being created for the two countries.
Sorry to interrupt you, Leonid. So that's the advantage for Russia, for the Kremlin. Putin has long had this idea of having a union of the two states and cementing himself as the president of the two of them. But the flip side is that what is happening in Minsk is a worrying warning to the Kremlin. And at the same time, we see this poisoning of Alexei Navalny, Putin's key opponent, who has been over to the east of Russia, to Khabarovsk, where there are big protests taking place. Can you talk a bit about that and why then a revolution in Minsk is so worrying for the Kremlin, Leonid?
Yeah, I think the most important, there should be a distinction made between the ongoing revolution in Belarus and the revolution in Ukraine back in 2014. In Ukraine, there were really strong anti-Russian undertones, and there was a lot of rhetorics of Russian imperialism, Russian colonialism, and getting away.
In this case, people have a lot of sympathy with the Belarusians. They feel very much akin to them. So it's not a question of two people pitted against each other. They actually sympathize with them.
Yeah, whereas in Belarus, the level of sort of symbiotic connection between Russians and Belarus, and this is mostly about the families, about people having relatives in Belarus or Belarusians having families in Russia. The percentage, if it is ever counted, would be extremely high. It was never counted, but by comparison in Ukraine, the percentage of people who have close relatives in Russian is 30%, is 28-30%.
Yeah.
It's much higher in Belarus.
So Russians feel very close to Belarusians and far
also Russian language is the dominant language in Belarus by far, despite the fact that there is Belarusian language, which is a state language in Belarus, but a minority of people speak it in real life. So the level of identification for Russians with Belarusian protesters is also very high. So this thing about Russians being a brotherly nation with Ukrainians, it played against Russia back in the time, but it plays. It played for Putin back in the time. But here with Belarus, it's probably going to be playing against him because cracking down on a revolution in Minsk is pretty much the same as cracking down on protests in Khabarovsk or in Tula or anywhere outside Moscow, in Moscow itself.
This is a very volatile position for Putin in how he handles this. It's not clear that he can just go in and back Lukashenko and just crush this. He's got to be very careful about that. So
it will be very hard.
Throw into the mix is the poisoning of Navalny. Can we just talk about that for a bit? That just comes out of the blue. We haven't seen. The Putin has been very happy to have these opposition figures, and it hasn't been deemed necessary to actually lock them up or kill them quite so blatantly.
Well, it's interesting that the poisoning of Navalny happened now during those events in Belarus, and again, I just wanted to reiterate it. Selling a crackdown in Belarus will be very hard for Putin in Russia. I mean, it's a very hard sell for him because partly because even the pro-government media in Russia was quite divided on how to cover those events, and there was a lot of fair and objective coverage even from government media. So. If Russian tanks roll into the streets of Minsk, what will happen in Moscow? What will happen in Khabarovsk? Russia is heading towards regional elections on the 13th of September. Elections, like it happened in Belarus and like it happened in Russia and Ukraine on previous occasions, elections can always trigger protests because they will be, as we know in Russia, they will be rigged. And especially in regions now, there is this role model of Khabarovsk where protests are continuing for 50 days in a row. They're not stopping, they're continuing daily. It's far away from Moscow. It's, 7 time zones away and 8,000 kilometers. But still it is relevant. People are reading about it. And Khabarovsk, along with Belarus, of course, presents a great role model for Russians themselves, and Belarus even more so, because this protest is extremely dignified. It is explicitly not anti-Russian.
Okay.
And
I'm gonna bring in some questions now. We'll come on to Navalny in a second. We haven't addressed that question just yet.
Sure.
But let's bring in some questions so we can get everybody else involved. Anna Logan is there. I think it's about 10:30 p.m. in Australia. So thank you very much, dear Australians, for staying up so late. Anna, you've got a question. I think you just need to unplug your microphone. There we go, Anna. Go ahead.
Yes, we don't seem to have heard yet much about the leader of the opposition in Belarus, whose name I've forgotten. Is she still outside the country? And is she seen as actually a legitimate leader in place of Lukashenko?
So Igor, just explain that. There are actually 3 leaders.
Yes, I think that Anna is talking about Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who is actually really in Lithuania. She went to our Central Election Committee, and she was scared there we think, by the leader of KGB, Belarusian KGB. And after that, in government car, they put her on the border to Lithuania, and now she stays there for months. And she announced herself as a leader of Belarusians. She didn't say that I'm a president. She said I'm a national leader. But her staff, the people who worked with her, they call her president because they believe she was elected. She get majority on these last elections. But there are also 2 other leaders. Is Valery Tsepkalo, who was not registered as a candidate, so we cannot say that he won on elections or not. And another one is Viktor Babaryka, who is a bankier, and he was not registered as well, and he stayed in prison now. And Valery Tsepkalo is out of Belarus as well. I think he's now in Kiev in Ukraine.
Okay. That's Simon Jackson. Let's go on to your question, Simon.
Related. Recent experience around the world of votes which are essentially against the status quo rather than in favor of any particular alternative, have not worked out very well. Any new administration would obviously arrive with good intentions, but how confident are the panelists, and on what basis do they believe that an alternative administration would actually be more would actually do better as opposed to have better intentions?
I mean, Igor, any new administration is going to be so drastically different to the one that's in place at the moment, whether or not it's more competent.
Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the main rival of Alexander Lukashenko and the woman who we believe won this elections, she announced that all administration of Alexander Lukashenko will stay on their positions only if they were not involved in some criminal breaking laws. So I think majority, like maybe 80% of people would stay on their places if she would be a new president. Maybe just for the period of transformation, then maybe she will change something. But she promised that majority of all Lukashenko's administration will keep their positions.
Igor, the thing we were talking about just now is that it's fascinating that Belarus still uses the name KGB for the security services. Russia changed it to the FSB. And more recently, Lukashenko brought in key members of the KGB to key members of government. So he, about 2 months ago, put people into very senior positions that indicates obviously a much harder line.
Yeah, he changed the prime minister. He was the former prime minister, Rumas. He was a liberal guy. He believed in free markets, and he's the main architect of these changes Leonid was talking about, that Belarus changed a little bit, the more small businesses opened in recent years. But 2 months before elections, Alexander Lukashenko changed him for a former vice president of KGB, vice head of KGB actually, because he did not believe Rumas that he would be loyal if something happened in Belarus. And maybe he was right, because Rumas somehow supported the protests. He posted a picture, his wife posted a picture on Instagram with words that we can understand as support for protesters.
Right. Okay. Let's go back, Leonid, to Navalny now, because I think this is this is very significant. Until for many years, Putin has ostensibly said, "Look, I've got nothing to fear from the opposition. What opposition characters there are. I mean, I'm a legitimate leader. I'm by far the most popular person in Russia, and these people can run around, do what they want. It doesn't matter." But it would seem now that Navalny did matter.
Well, Navalny does matter, and one indication for that is the fact that Putin has been for years avoiding calling Navalny by name. He's something of out of Harry Potter. He's someone who shall not be named. And neither Putin himself nor Peskov, his press secretary, ever called Navalny by name. So last time when Navalny got poisoned, Putin's press secretary referred to him as a patient. Navalny is extremely important. He is by far the most charismatic Russian opposition politician, and he built a super efficient organization that is nationwide. It's a campaign, and it does another thing apart from sort of political campaigning. It is also, it could be called one of the main investigative journalism outlets in Russia. They conduct major investigations into the corruption of Putin's entourage. And these investigations are presented in the form of very well-crafted YouTube videos, films. And these films are watched by millions. There is one of the most famous example is a film about Medvedev, the former prime minister of Russia. Last time I was on that YouTube channel. I think it had it counted 28 million views on that video.
And the point to emphasize here, Leonid, is that Navalny had been excluded. The state, the Kremlin controls state media. They dominate the airwaves, and Navalny very cleverly has been able to use social media and get onto YouTube and get to Russians in a way that the Kremlin can't control.
Yeah, absolutely. There was they experimented with letting Navalny to take part in the elections back 7 or 8 years ago, I believe, when they allowed him to run in the Moscow mayoral election. He was before he was allowed to run, he was in prison. He learned about being allowed to run when he was in prison cell, but he was promptly released. And he could conduct a campaign, although he didn't have any access to television at all. And his supporters were clamped down when they tried to agitate in the streets. Nevertheless, he gained 27% of votes in Moscow for him, and he has nearly managed to get into the runoff with the pro-Putin incumbent. And that's despite billions and billions of dollars being poured into reconstruction in Moscow, something that Nick and participants on our tours have witnessed. Moscow has been upgraded a great deal, the transport system, the outlook of the streets. It became an infinitely better environment to live in the last decade. However, still Navalny gained 27% in a very unfair election back in the time. And if a fair election is conducted in Moscow today, I'm pretty sure Navalny would have won.
Yeah, and I think I think it's important to emphasize Navalny's strategy, which is saying support anyone but Putin, support anyone but United Russia, the president's party. And it didn't matter how peculiar or nasty the opponent might be. The point was you were backing candidates against the Kremlin, and that's what's happening in Khabarovsk, and it was proving very successful. Please, can we have more questions if you can just start putting the questions in the Q&A box, and we'll bring more people in. I want to come back to both of you though, to ask the same question again. Why is this happening now? Why is Putin under pressure so much now? What's the timing of this? And why is Lukashenko doing so badly now? And if we step back a bit, what is causing them both to be under pressure at this moment? I mean, Igor, you spoke about the taxation, you spoke about COVID. Can you point to anything else?
People are tired as well. That's the third maybe main thing, that people are tired. Lukashenko is in power for 26 years. You are just tired about one person who is every day lighted on TV stations. Every TV stations gives him the majority of time of the on the TV screen. So people are just tired, and Lukashenko is also getting old. I mean, he's not a young and energetic leader anymore. He's an old man. He's 66. He celebrated his 66 birthday yesterday. So, he's not popular like a man, like a leader. He was strongly supported by women, for example, in 90s, because he was young, beautiful, nice man. He's a high person. I mean, he was attractive as a person, and now he's not anymore. That's also very important, because when we make polls on the street, our journalists in Belarus make polls on the street, and I see them every day. One of the most common answers is we're tired.
Yeah, fascinating. And Leonid, I mean, both Lukashenko and Putin like to play ice hockey. And I can remember Vladimir Putin sort of naked riding a horse with a gun slung over his back or something like that. Yeah, people are tired in Russia too.
Yeah, I would absolutely. They are tired. I would just second what Igor just said. Imagine you're a Belarusian and you're 26 years old. You were born under Lukashenko, you went to school under Lukashenko, you went to university under Lukashenko, and now you're an adult and Lukashenko is still in charge. Would you want to change that? Same goes for Putin. It's not 26 years, it's 20 years. But for example, I followed Navalny on his presidential campaign in Siberia, actually in the same city where he got poisoned a few weeks ago in Tomsk. It's quite amazing when you see the crowd of Navalny supporters. Most of them would be in their teens or in their 20s, a large part of them. And when you do vox pops, when you talk to them, they say the very same thing. I want to see something in my life which is not Putin.
Yeah, I think that's the same time. What's going to happen next? And we've got two great questions coming up. So Marty Ryan first, and then Andy Mendes. So Marty, go ahead first, please.
Hi, thank you. Given what you've said about the fragility of Lukashenko at the moment, what are the variety of possibilities of what you see as potential outcomes of this situation?
Yeah, Leonid, it's worrying, isn't it? Or Igor, I mean, Igor, go ahead. Igor, are you worried? Are you worried about violence, of civil war?
Yeah, the possibility is getting stronger. I mean, of the civil war, because the main narrative in state media now is to divide people, Belarusians, by their faith, Catholics and Orthodox, by the language they speak, Belarusian Russian, by that Leonid said already. I think he mentioned that they try to make some, divisions in Belarusian society, and that makes that makes different groups of people who are feel anger against each other. For example, yesterday, the head of Catholic Church of Belarus was not allowed to get back to country. He's a citizen of Belarus. That's one of the most rare repressions against own people in the world. The citizen of Belarus was not allowed to come back from other country. That was Soviet Union was doing to famous authors like Brodsky, for example. And he is still the head of Catholic Church in Belarus. He was criticizing Lukashenko's regime, and he was on his trip to Poland. And when he was on the border, Belarusian border guards stopped him and said, "You are not allowed to come back to country."
Okay, so
without giving any reason.
Yeah, it is clearly very, very worrying. And I know, Leonid, you'll have comments in a second, but let's bring in Andy Mendes. So Andy, you've got a great follow-up, Andy.
Yeah, just from a personal point of view, Igor, I would suggest to you that 66 is actually quite young. And certainly if you look at the States at the moment, even I'm feeling quite young. But my question really is perhaps to both of you, is that we hear in the UK, we hear a bit about the Ukraine, especially when we get upset about Crimea. But we hear, at least in my context, we heard virtually nothing about the West's and NATO's view on Belarus. What you've told me is it's very close to Russia ethnically and maybe historically. But what do you think the West is likely to do if this?
Yeah.
If this
So, Leonid, this is a really interesting one. There's been a sort of pattern of sanctions, travel restrictions, sort of fairly small restrictions placed on Belarus over the past 20 years with little effect. There's a sort of reticence to be too interventionist, isn't there, Leonid?
Well, I think, Igor might disagree with me, but in my opinion, and my opinion stems from covering the revolution in Ukraine and so the war in Ukraine, the less the West and the United States in its present form meddles into the affairs in Belarus, the better for Belarus and for the opposition in Belarus. Because, as Sigrid rightly said, there is a very strong attempt on the part of Lukashenko and his Russian backers to foment polarization, to foment civil war. However, the Belarusian society is much more cohesive than Ukrainian society. There are no natural cultural divides really there in Belarusian society. People are quite united. So it's better for the West to sit out and wait till the fall of the regime happens naturally. We're seeing a very, very broad movement involving millions of people. We can pretty confidently say that it involves a majority of the population. It might be not enough because members of the government and members of security forces are not involved yet. However, these people also don't live in a vacuum. They have children that go to school, they have relatives, they have friends. So it takes time before they find themselves in intolerable position in this particular society. So it would be much better to wait till a natural velvet revolution in the vein of 1989 revolutions happens, rather than what happened in Ukraine, which was the real.
What's your view on that? Do you agree or disagree with Leonid there?
Partly, I partly agree with Leonid because sure, I think that the direct interference in what is going on in Belarus is very dangerous. But I think that we need to divide everything into two things. First is moral position of West. It's like moral sanctions against people who were involved in cheating the elections and in these repressions against their own people. I mean, the head of KGB, for example, what Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia did 2 days ago, yesterday, they introduced the sanctions against 28 responsible persons in Lukashenko's government. So that's one of the parts what Western countries could do. And another is help, because Belarusians need help. For example, there are hundreds of people now escaping the country, and they go to Lithuania, like Tikhanovskaya, to Poland, and they need to have some support here. And Polish government and Lithuanian government already did some programs. They started some programs, and they have helped these people who are running out of the country. So that's our main two things that Western countries or European Union could do now.
Okay, Igor, I just want to, can you explain to people what you do? Because you work for a Belarusian TV, a satellite TV station that's actually in Poland. So
yes.
that's not liked by the Belarusian government.
Yes, we are the television that was founded 13 years ago after elections in 2006, actually, because Belarus has no independent TV stations. All medias are state-run. And at that time, in 2006, the internet was not so popular in Belarus. Now we have a lot of popular websites in Belarus. But at that time, the strategy was to have some broadcast to Belarus from abroad, that we are not controlled by the regime. And
the government sees that as foreign interference with domestic affairs.
Sorry?
The Belarusian government must see that as foreign interference.
Yes, they always repeat it. And my TV station, Belsat, was a few times, it was a danger that they will close us because there was a warming in relations between Belarus and Poland, and we were under pressure. I mean, the Belarusian side said that it's the Belsat TV is weapon against the Belarusian legal government, but it didn't happen. And now you can see that it was good choice of Polish government, that they did right.
Nigel Harley, you've got a question, sort of good follow-up question. We talked a bit about the relationship between Poland and Belarus, which is a tricky one, a difficult one. And your question's a good follow-up to that, Nigel.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, clearly, yeah.
Yeah, good. Yes, I mean, I was really interested to know what the attitude of the Baltic countries must be towards what's happening in Belarus, because A, they're geographically very close, and B, of course, we all know they're being threatened by Russia in various different ways and formats. And I know that I think Leonid, you're in Lithuania at the moment.
Leonid's in Riga, in Latvia. Which
Riga, sorry.
Possibly even more interesting because
Yeah.
Latvia's got a substantial Russian population, and so they're much more sensitive to those tensions. Leonid, what's the view? What's the sense you get about what's happening in Belarus at the moment?
Well, there's a major outpour of solidarity in Baltic countries with Belarusians. Traditionally with Lithuania, because of history, Lithuanians and Belarusians, they existed together for centuries in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania before both were gradually sort of taken over by the Russian Empire. The current coat of arms of the opposition is a common coat of arms of the Lithuanians and Belarusians. In Lithuania, there was a major event recently. 50,000 people built a human chain on the border of Belarus, and many of my Latvian friends from Riga went there and joined this chain. That's on the positive side. On the negative side, Baltic countries tend to frame everything in geopolitical terms, and that's quite debilitating in the Belarusian case. And that's not very helpful at all. I believe when everything is being framed, when everything is being depicted in terms of Russia versus the rest of the world, Russia versus the West, when Belarus is being turned into a battlefield in this global confrontation between the West and Russia, this is against the interests of Belarus. And this actually helps Putin quite a lot, because that's what he really wanted to be framed like, as
Igor,
a matter of
do you think that's a problem, that Belarus becomes this battleground between East and West, and that undermines your position?
So it was a question to me, yeah?
Yeah, yes, you, yeah.
I'm very sorry, could you repeat it again?
So are you worried that, Leonid was saying that there's this risk
Yeah,
that
I'll listen.
becomes this pawn in the battle between, between Russia and the West, and that would undermine the case for the sort of democratic revolution?
I think he's not far from the truth. I mean that, and Latvian, Baltic states are not far from the truth, because it's really geopolitical now, war between the West and Russia. Belarus is the field of this war. I see it exactly like this, because Putin helps Alexander Lukashenko to stay in power now. For example, he sent Russia Today journalists there, and 12 or 15 journalists are now working in Belarus, and they are because a lot of...
That's fascinating. That really shows you how important it is, that having that media coverage there. I mean, that's really something. That's the modern equivalent of sending, your
yes, and suddenly the whole propaganda, Belarusian propaganda, become more smart. Because Belarusian propaganda was like old Soviet style. It was strict, direct, and now it's more smart, because they use some Russian technologies. They're seeding some ideas and waiting until they grow, and people will believe in that. So I think that Belarus is really a field for this geopolitical war between Russia and maybe West, but West is not so much interested in Belarus as for now. But Baltic states are, because we have very strong trade connections to Lithuania. You should know that the Lithuanian Klaipėda port depends strongly on Belarusian export and import. It's 40% of all Klaipeda port cargo, and this port gives 7% of whole Lithuanian GDP. So Belarusian export and import operations are like 3.5% of whole Lithuanian GDP.
Right. So just picking on that, so that you're saying that Russia's the trade with Russia is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, trade with Russia is also, but I mean Lithuania as well. So Lithuania is strongly interested in keeping good relations with Belarus. But yeah, Russia, we have half of our trade goes to Russia. So we depend on Russia very much, is not a secret.
Okay, we've just got a few more minutes here, and I'm going to bring in, I'm going to chivvy a few of you along here. I'd love to get some comments from Jim Lernstein. Jim, if you're listening in, we'll put you across in there. And also, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to pick on Lynn Maddock, and then possibly Stuart Williams, if you're there as well, because I just want to bring in a few more questions here while we've got some time. So Jim, I don't know if you can hear us, if you can switch, put your microphone on. Jim, what were your thoughts? I just want to get a few more reactions before we finish up here. Jim. Don't know if Jim can hear us. If Jim can't, the microphone's on the bottom left-hand side. And if you can't get to that, if I don't see that microphone come up, I'll move to Lynn next. So I don't know if Lynn can say anything. It may be that people can't pick up on this quickly enough. While we're waiting there for those comments, I mean, Leonid, if I could get both of you to make sort of predictions. I know it's very difficult to sort of gaze into the crystal ball. Leonid, what do you see happening over the next few months?
I think it is the protests in Belarus are inseparable from the development of the situation in Russia. I see it really as a prelude to the same things happening in Russia, possibly quite soon. What I'm predicting is that this situation will linger, that Lukashenko will be there will be ups and downs, and Lukashenko will be trying to save himself. At the same time, there will be negotiations, and they are going on with the Russian mediation and with the Baltic and Polish mediation between Lukashenko and maybe selected members of the opposition, maybe with the opposition as a whole. It depends on how united they are at the moment. I'm seeing signs of some sort of disagreements between the Babarika camp and the others. Maybe they will come to some kind of compromise, but still, it's an ongoing process, and inevitably, what is happening now in Belarus will spill into Russia. And if the Russian leadership is mad enough, and maybe I'm not excluding it, they've shown signs of madness a few times. If they're mad enough to intervene in Belarus militarily, to take over Belarus, then what they have as an outcome is an additional 10 million people who don't want Putin to stay in power in this sort of broader state. It's an additional 6 Khabarovsks and an additional Moscow to the Moscow that's already not Putin's, that doesn't support Putin.
So, Igor, there would be a much more clever outcome, some kind of compromise, ensure that you can keep control. Russia gains more influence in Belarus. The Democrats get some kind of something chucked to them, but not a lot. And there's stability is maintained. What do you think is going to happen?
I think that Lukashenko will not have any mediations with opposition leaders, because for him it's a sign of weakness, and he is a dictator. Dictators never speak, they never talk to opposition. They want to show power, they want to show repressions, but not sit in front, at one table and talk to them. But maybe if the situation will get worse for Lukashenko economically, I mean, maybe in few months we'll see that. Who knows? But rather now, I mean, at this moment, there is no signs that he will go on any negotiations with some Western countries. I rather think that he is, we call it, he is firing the bridges. Am I right, Leonid?
Burning the bridges down. He's burning.
Burning bridges. He's burning bridges because this situation with the head of Catholic Church I mentioned, it's 100% burning bridges, because Vatican was very important actor in past for Lukashenko. The Vatican was the country that helped Lukashenko to stop the sanctions. Twice he visited the Pope, and he has these tokens, and he asked about help to stop Western sanctions, and he succeeded 2 times. And now this not letting in the head of Catholic Church, it's completely blocks the opportunity to talk to Vatican again, and to Western countries as well. He fired all bridges with Poland and Lithuania, accusing them that they want to bring revolution and Maidan to Belarus.
Okay.
So,
well, Igor and Leonid, it's been a fascinating discussion. I think it's really helped me learn a lot more. If you can stay on the line for our discussion in a moment, when we try and get more comments from everybody who's been listening in, just to get their views. If you've got a moment to stay on, please do stay on. Our next discussion is on Thursday, the 3rd of September at 1 p.m. and that's called Pakistan Power Struggle, and that's with Owen Bennett-Jones. He's the former BBC correspondent, and he's got a new book coming out on the Bhutto family, which is going to be a very powerful book. And it'll be a very interesting discussion. If you want to learn more about that region, it'll be a very good one to tune into. So that's this Thursday coming at 1 p.m. BST. Thanks again very much to Igor and Leonid. If you've got time, please stay with us. So what we do now is just try and get a few more comments here from people who are tuning in. And I know that Louise Tarrant is there. If I can just bring Louise up. Let me just see. I'm just going to see the screen. I can't see everyone's names. Yeah, Louise. What? So, oh no, we have got.
It's Yuri here.
Yuri, how are you doing? It's
doing well.
Louise disguised with a beard.
Can I just? There was a question I didn't quite get the answer to, which was the timing of the poisoning in the Soviet Union, in Russia. Why was it now? I didn't quite get the response.
Really good. I didn't succeed in following that up. Leonid, why has this happened now? Why has Navalny been poisoned now?
Well, it is a hard question. We can speculate, and at the end of the day, when it's investigated, the answer will be quite different. But yes, there is the context is the protests in Belarus. The other part of the context is that on the 13th of September, as protests in Belarus and protests in Khabarovsk continue, there will be an election day in Russia. There will be elections in various Russian regions. As Nick explained, Navalny has this tactical platform. It is called the Smart Vote, and it has been quite efficient in various places around the country in derailing the campaigns of pro-Kremlin candidates. What happens in reality is that opposition candidates wouldn't be allowed to participate in the elections, but there will be pretense of pluralism. There will be several candidates, and most of the other candidates would belong to the quasi-opposition parties, such as Zhirinovsky, LDPR, or the Communist Party. So what Navalny has been arguing for is, and they actually created a very smart algorithm, which allows people on the day of the election to look up on an app on their phone and vote for the candidate who is not the chosen Kremlin candidate, who is a spoiler in most cases, a random person. And then they all sort of, this mob of people votes this random person in. And that's what arguably happened in Khabarovsk, where a member of Zhirinovsky's LDPR party became the governor, and the entire regional council was taken over by this party. And almost the same situation happened in Vladivostok, in the neighboring region, but extreme rigging prevented the Kremlin from losing the elections there as well. So that's very efficient, and the authorities are quite visibly afraid of those initiatives, those very tech-savvy initiatives that Navalny has been promoting. So that could be the reason. But the other reason is interpersonal relations between Navalny and the person who is known as Putin's chef, Mr. Prigozhin, who is viewed responsible for the election meddling in America, and who is also considered responsible for sending private armies to various countries, to Ukraine, to Syria, to Libya, the group that is known as the Wagner Group. So this is a very dangerous and a very dangerous man who was in direct confrontation with Navalny, who is quite open about wanting Navalny, if not dead, then at least out of the politics. And after Navalny got poisoned, Prigozhin made some really snide comments on the poisoning, and there was a lot of Schadenfreude, like he was really openly happy about Navalny being poisoned.
Yeah, and it's not as if that he could. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name properly. The chef from
Prigozhin.
It's not as if he could operate freely of his own will. He's got to have a nod and a wink in order to get things done.
Well, look, it's hard to say. No, it's not how Russia works. It's not that Putin is holding all the ropes and manipulating everybody. There are many operators. They are competitive, and they are highly autonomous. So yes, it is possible that Prigozhin is acting on his own initiative, as much as it is possible that Chechen leaders were acting on their own initiative when Boris Nemtsov, the other major leader of the Russian opposition, was killed by the Chechens. Putin's role is not very much in giving orders to these people. His role is in creating this system and creating this atmosphere in which such murders and such attempts at assassination become possible.
But if you kill someone or reduce them, incapacitate them to the extent that of somebody who's that important, you've got to know that that the repercussions, the Kremlin's got to be okay with the repercussions.
Yes, it works as think of it as a mechanism. You may even imagine that Putin is against this or that particular murder, but he created this machine that sort of steamrolling. It continues to work, and killings happen whether Putin wants it or not. It's a system.
Yeah. Andy Mendes, you've got a good comment here. Andy, do you want to go ahead?
Okay, it's puzzled me, Nicholas, for a while. I mean, we're all told about the efficiency and brutality of the Russian state, and we're assuming that all the poisonings scattered around the world are indeed initiated by the Russians, and yet they don't seem to be very good at killing people.
I think, Andy, this was a question we raised with a former member of the Russian military intelligence when we had lunch with him at his dacha. I said standards have fallen, and he was slightly rattled. Leonid, that's true, isn't it?
Well, the question is about the criteria. Yeah, that's true, absolutely. The criteria is. What is the criteria of efficiency? If you think about those poisonings or killings as
think about the Skripals and the way that was done. It was done so openly, direct flight back again.
Absolutely. You think of it. This is an act of terror. The objective is to sow terror. So it's about a message. And in this message, it doesn't really matter where this person is dead. Maybe it is even better if this person survives. The point is to send a message to a broader group of people. In Skripal's case, that's the group which is defined by Putin and his anti-Russia's traitors, like former intelligence officers. In Navalny's or Nemtsov's case, that's different. They're not regarded as traitors. The message is to, I guess, to political activists. And again, there is this personal factor with people like Prigozhin or with people like Kadyrov. We're dealing with a very non-transparent system, and we may or may not find out at the end of the day who ordered those killings.
Yeah, okay. So Andy, I think that's a pretty good answer, I think, Andy.
Yeah, it does. It maybe makes some sense. It's nice to know that Mr. Putin has a soft heart after all of this. After all we're told about him, he's trying hard to preserve populations.
I do recommend the lunch at the end of our tour in Russia, where we meet this former colonel in the GRU, where he talks quite openly about his opinions about the Soviet Union and what's happening now, and sort of talk subtly about what used to be in terms of the security services. It's a very interesting end to the tour that we had there. Let's bring in a few other voices before we wrap up. I would love to get any thoughts from Lynn Maddock. I don't know if we have Jim Lowenstein still there. I don't know if we have, no, I don't think we do actually. But Lynn, have you got any thoughts there? Go on, Lynn.
Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, it seems that authoritarian regimes fall when people stop being scared of them. And from this distance, watching what's happening in Minsk, it appears that the population is no longer scared of the government. Do people agree with that thesis, that means that the government is in dire straits in Minsk?
Igor.
It's hard to answer because it's hard to tell, because people are scary. You never can stop scaring when the force is used against you. I mean, it's
when you were arrested, were you beaten in jail?
When me personally, a little bit, let's say like this. But now they are very brutal. What they do now, it never happened in past in Belarus. I mean, they're shooting at people. You can be a woman in my city, in Brest. I'm originally from Brest. It's the most western city in Belarus. And she was shot on her balcony just because she shouted on police that they were beating someone. She said, "What you are doing?" And suddenly she gets shot, with this rubber bullets. But when you see the pictures, what happened to her body, it's unbelievable. I mean, people never stop being scared about the violence. But somehow the feeling that they're fed up with the power of Lukashenko, with his ruling, is stronger than this fear.
Leonid, my sense of things in Russia is that people they're not afraid of Putin. There's been a sort of sense of respect for what he's done to Russia, building up its image internationally, bringing really about, quite significant economic change. So there isn't that sense of that fear, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think what's important to understand about both Belarus and Russia is that people contrast those periods under Putin and Lukashenko against the 20th century, which was a century of genocide and misery for both Russians and Belarusians. And if you take 100 years starting from the Russian Revolution in 1917, then you had a century of total misery and genocide. And then after that, during the rule of Putin and Lukashenko, these were probably the best decades in the century in terms of the quality of the lifestyle, in terms of, even in terms of freedom. If you think about freedom not as just voting for some party or for some, in case of Eastern Europe, for some oligarchs. It's a freedom of movement, it's a freedom of choosing your style of life. More so in Russia than in Belarus.
That's a pretty stark comparison when you can see across the border in the Baltics the kind of life that people can have there, and you think that's a possibility.
Well, look, if you look, I travel between Moscow and Latvia every now and then. And to be honest, entering Moscow by car is, or entering Riga by car, if you compare those two things, when you enter Riga, you feel like you're entering something Soviet.
Yeah,
when you enter Moscow,
that's not a fair comparison between.
Okay, fair comparison.
I mean, you take your Kashenberg or a crippled village or town; it's a very different picture.
Okay, fair comparison. You find crippled villages in Latvia as well. Fair comparison is GDP per purchasing power. That's the more or less an indicator of standards of living. It is roughly the same in Russia and Latvia. Russia has the GDP PPP equal to sort of more poor European Union countries. Yeah. And it has better GDP than Romania and Bulgaria.
Igor, what do you think of that argument? I know Belarus might be regarded as far more impoverished, but can you see the appeal of Leonid's argument to somebody who's Russian?
But Belarus is worse off, of course.
Igor, sorry. Igor, are you still there?
Maybe we've lost him.
Maybe we've lost Igor. Let's bring in Sarah Biffin, who's got her hand raised. Go on. I think you need to unplug your mic. If you look at the bottom left-hand side of your screen.
Hello, I wanted to ask about the funding of the opposition in Belarus. Do they have any difficulty, or are funds easily available to them?
Yeah, financially, is money an issue? Is money important? I don't know if we've lost Igor. We may have lost Igor. Just to see if Igor's there. I think we have lost Igor. So Leonid, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think what is happening is because it is largely based on the initiative of millions of people now. I think it's a very cheap affair for the opposition. There is a lot of initiative that is grassroots, and in many ways the opposition movement in Belarus is leaderless. There are leaders who don't need to organize too much. It is largely organized through Facebook groups or similar groups on social media in various cities and towns. And you don't really need to have sort of paid staffers there or anything like that. However, there is a large group of Belarusian businessmen who are part of the movement. One of them is now in prison. He was the main presidential candidate, anti-Lukashenko candidate, Viktor Babarika, and he was actually, all of his life, he was a manager in the Russian Gazprom, in Russia's Gazprom bank. But he's a technocrat who just got fed up, very much like Lukashenko's previous prime minister. There are also people from the Belarusian IT sector, which are very active. IT sector was very active in the Ukrainian revolution as well. In Belarus, it is arguably even more important than in Ukraine. So there's money coming from there, and of course it's a movement that is largely led by middle class and the upper class people who have some money, but you don't really need to spend much money to organize those things.
That's a really interesting point, and I think it's also a point about modern political movements everywhere. Money might help; it doesn't have to. If you look at Black Lives Matter, for example, in the United States, it's a similar kind of leaderless leadership, if you like. Thank you very much, Leonid, for staying on. It's been really, really interesting. Just to repeat again, everyone, our next discussion is this Thursday. It's called Pakistan Power Struggle, and that's with Owen Bennett-Jones, and that's at 1 p.m. this Thursday. Thanks again to Igor and to Leonid. We'll see you all again online soon. Thank you and goodbye.